My dad secretly married his lover and moved his stepdaughters into my inherited home. But when I evicted them and his wife betrayed him, he came back begging for forgiveness and now lives under my rules. I'm 25 years old, work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and honestly, I need to tell this story. Because what happened in the last few months basically destroyed my relationship with my dad and made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. The thing is, when I was 16, my mom died. Pancreatic cancer? It was horrible and fast. Like in 6 months, we went from planning my summer vacation to being at her funeral. My dad was devastated. Or so I thought. And I inherited the house because my mom had inherited it from her parents. It was a huge ancestral property. You know, one of those old houses with 7 bedrooms, like 8 or 9 bathrooms, full basement, pool in the backyard, the whole thing. My mom had been very clear in her will. The house was mine, period. And Amy, the lawyer who handled all the paperwork, made sure I understood that legally I was the sole owner from the moment I turned 18, although I had obviously lived there with my dad since I was 16, because I was a minor. The first few years after my mom's death were weird but manageable, I guess. My dad is an engineer, makes good money, has always been responsible with finances and stuff, and I was in school trying to process the grief while finishing high school. There was never any drama about the house. My dad paid the utilities and maintenance, and I contributed what I could when I started working. It was an arrangement that worked for both of us. He never dated anyone, at least not that I knew of, and I honestly thought he was still grieving my mom, because every time I mentioned that maybe he should try to meet new people, he would change the subject or get uncomfortable. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs, the work trips that seemed increasingly frequent, the phone calls he made from his room with the door closed. But I was busy with my own life. I finished college, got my job, adopted Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel, who is basically my baby, and met Jake, my boyfriend, who comes from a normal middle-class family and always felt a little intimidated by the size of the house, but was super sweet and respectful. Everything went to hell like 5 months ago, when my dad came back from one of his business trips and told me we needed to talk. I was in the living room working on my laptop with Moxie, sleeping at my feet, and he arrived with this weird face, like nervous but also kind of excited, and dropped the bomb on me. He had gotten married. Just like that. Without warning. Without introducing me to the person. Without anything. I sat there processing the information because I literally didn't know what to say. And then he told me his new wife's name was Steph, that they had been high school sweethearts before he met my mom, that they had reconnected like 2 years ago, 2 years, and he never told me anything, and that she was going to move into the house with her twin daughters who were 20, Lizzie and Lexi, who were in college. Oh, and they also had of colleged 3 dogs. 3 big dogs that weren't trained. I found out about that later. I tried to stay calm. I really tried. And I told him, Dad, I understand you're happy and everything, but this is my house. Technically speaking, and maybe you should have consulted me before making this decision. He immediately got super defensive. Told me he had lived there for years, that it was his house as much as mine, that I was selfish for not wanting to share the space with his new family. All that crap. I explained that it wasn't about being selfish, it was about respect and communication. That the house had 7 bedrooms, so obviously there was space, but that I would have liked to meet Steph and the twins before they moved in. You know what I mean? But he had already made the decision and basically told me they were arriving that weekend, so I was left in total shock because what was I supposed to do? The weekend arrived, and with it came Steph, and from the moment I saw her, I knew this was going to be a disaster. She was like 51 years old, looked good for her age, but there was something about the way she looked at the house, like evaluating everything with these calculating eyes, and the twins were basically copies of her, blonde, tall, with this attitude of superiority that immediately irritated me. The dogs, which were 2 golden retrievers and a German shepherd, came running in without leashes and immediately destroyed the yard. And when Moxie came out to see what was happening, the German shepherd chased her and made her hide under the porch, barking terrified. I was furious. I told Steph she needed to control her dogs, and she just laughed and said, "Oh, they're playful. Your little dog needs to learn to socialize." Playful. My dog was literally trembling with fear. The first few weeks were tense but tolerable, more or less. Steph and the twins settled into 3 of the bedrooms, left their stuff all over the house like they owned the place, and started making changes without consulting me. Steph redecorated the living room because, according to her, the furniture my mom had chosen was outdated and depressing, moved all the family pictures that were on the walls and replaced them with photos of her, my dad, and the twins, as if I didn't exist, or as if my mom had never lived there. When I said something to my dad, he told me I was being dramatic, that they were just decorations, that I needed to learn to share the space, and I realized he was completely on Steph's side in everything. No matter how unreasonable she was, the closet space situation was the first truly big conflict. I had my bedroom, which was quite large with a walk-in closet that I had organized perfectly over the years, and one day I came back from the grocery store and found Steph in my closet moving my clothes. I asked her what the hell she was doing, and she told me very casually that she needed space for her clothes because the closet in the guest bedroom where she had settled was too small, and that since I had so much space I should share. I told her no, that was my private bedroom, and she had no right to enter without permission, and she got super offended, started yelling at me that I was a spoiled, selfish child, that the house was big enough for everyone, but I was acting like I was a princess. My dad heard the commotion, came upstairs, and instead of supporting me, he told me to let Steph use half the closet, that it wasn't a big deal. I exploded, told him the house was legally mine, that Steph had no right to my private spaces, and my dad looked at me with this expression of disappointment and said my mom would be ashamed of my attitude. That hurt. I'm not going to lie. It hurt a lot because my mom had left me the house specifically to protect me, to ensure I always had a safe place, and now my dad was using her memory to manipulate me. I called Amy, the lawyer, that same night and explained the situation to her. She confirmed what I already knew. The house was completely mine. My dad had no legal right to the property, and I had every right to establish rules or even to ask them to leave if the situation became unbearable. That conversation gave me some clarity, I guess. But it also made me feel guilty. Because, was I really going to kick my dad out of the house where he had lived with my mom? Things got worse fast after that. The twins, Lizzie and Lexi, started having parties in the basement without telling me. They invited their friends from college and left everything trashed, beer bottles everywhere, stains on the furniture, the whole thing. One night I went down because the music was so loud I couldn't concentrate on my work, and I found like 15 people in my basement, using my bar that had been my grandfather's, smoking inside the house, even though I had made it very clear you couldn't smoke inside. I told everyone to leave. The twins yelled at me that I was a buzzkill, and when I told my dad the next day, he said I needed to relax, that the girls were just having fun, and that I should be more flexible. The incident with the dogs and Moxie was what finally made me make the decision that this couldn't continue. Steph's dogs were never properly trained. They were always running wild through the house, knocking things over, breaking decorations, and Steph never disciplined them. One day, I was in my room working when I heard Moxie yelping, and I ran downstairs to find the German Shepherd biting her neck while the other two dogs were barking around them. Moxie was bleeding. I was hysterical, screaming, and Steph appeared walking calmly from the kitchen and said, "Oh, they must be playing rough." Playing. My dog was injured. I took her to the emergency vet. She had to have stitches. And when I got back, I told Steph that her dogs couldn't be in the same house as Moxie, that she needed to find another place for them or keep them outside. She told me I was ridiculous, that Moxie had probably provoked the attack, and my dad, who had been present during this whole conversation, said absolutely nothing to defend me. That night, I made the decision. I couldn't go on like this anymore. The situation was unbearable, and clearly my dad had chosen Steph and her daughters over me. The next morning, I went downstairs and told everyone they had to leave, that I was giving them reasonable time to find another place, but that this situation wasn't working and the house was mine, so it was my final decision. Steph exploded, started screaming that I was an ungrateful bitch, that she had tried to be a good stepmother but I was impossible, that my mom had been a bad, useless mother who had spoiled me and that's why I was like this. When she said that something broke in me, I screamed at her to shut up, to never talk about my mom again, and told her she had 2 weeks to pack her things and get out of my house. My dad tried to intervene, told me I was being irrational, that Steph hadn't meant what she said about my mom, that I was destroying his marriage and his happiness. I gave him an ultimatum. Either he chose to be on my side and ask Steph to apologize and respect the house rules, or he left with her. I thought he was going to choose me. I honestly thought that at the end of the day I was his daughter and that meant something. But he looked at Steph, then looked at me, and said that if I kicked them out, he would go with them because she was his wife and he wasn't going to abandon her. In that moment, I realized I had already lost him, that Steph had him completely manipulated, or that maybe my dad had never been the person I thought he was. I called Amy again and explained everything that had happened. She advised me to make everything official, to give them a formal written eviction notice, 30 days as required by law in our state, even though technically they weren't tenants and I wasn't legally obligated to give them that much time. But she said it was better to do things right to protect myself from possible future legal problems. I hired a courier service to deliver the formal eviction letters to my dad, Steph, and each of the twins, and the tension in the house became absolutely unbearable after that. Steph insulted me every time she saw me. The twins acted like I was a monster, and my dad just avoided me, didn't even talk to me. During those 30 days, I did what Amy had advised me to do. I changed all the locks in the house and didn't give them copies of the new keys. Installed a security system with cameras at all entrances and in common spaces, moved all my mom's valuables to a storage unit, and stored all important documents in a safety deposit box at the bank. Jake helped me with everything. He was incredibly understanding and supportive, although his family thought I was being too hard on my dad, but he defended me and told me I was doing the right thing by protecting my property and my peace of mind. One afternoon, like 2 weeks before the eviction deadline expired, I went up to the attic to look for more of my mom's things to store. The attic was a huge space that no one really used, full of old boxes with Christmas decorations, antique furniture, clothes from decades ago, basically my whole family's history. I was moving boxes when I found a shoebox hidden behind an old trunk, and when I opened it, I found a bunch of letters, like 50 or 60 letters, tied with a ribbon. The letters were from my dad to Steph, and from Steph to my dad. And when I started reading them, I realized they dated back to when my parents were still married, when my mom was still alive. The letters were explicit. They talked about their love, about how hard it was to keep the secret, about how they planned to be together someday when the time was right. There were letters from 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, all hidden in my mom's attic, and I sat there on the dusty floor feeling like the world was falling apart around me. My dad had been having an affair with Steph for years, probably throughout his entire marriage to my mom, and I had never known. My mom had known. She had to have known if the letters were hidden in her attic, but she had never told me anything. She had protected that secret until her death. Everything suddenly made sense. The way my dad had been so devastated after her death but had recovered suspiciously quickly. The way he had never wanted to talk about remarrying, but suddenly showed up married to his high school sweetheart. The fights I vaguely remembered hearing between my parents when I was little but hadn't understood at the time. I went down from the attic with the box of letters and confronted my dad that same night. I found him in the living room watching TV. Steph was in the kitchen making dinner, and I put the box on the coffee table in front of him and asked him directly if he had had an affair with Steph while he was married to my mom. He immediately turned pale, looked at the box, then looked at me, and said nothing for a moment that felt eternal. He finally admitted that yes, he had been in love with Steph since high school, that he had married my mom because it was what was expected of him, but he had never stopped loving Steph, that they had reconnected years later and had maintained a relationship for a long time. I asked him if my mom had known, and he said he believed so, that she probably did. But they had never explicitly talked about it. Steph heard the conversation and came out of the kitchen, and instead of being remorseful or ashamed, she got defensive, told me I didn't understand true love, that she and my dad were meant to be together, that my mom had been an obstacle to their happiness. I yelled at her that my mom had been a real person with feelings, that she had been an incredible mother and a good wife, despite the fact that my dad had betrayed her for years, and Steph just shrugged and said my mom hadn't made my dad happy. In that, the moment I felt such deep hatred that I was literally shaking, and I told her to get out of my house immediately, not in 30 days but right now, that night. My dad tried to calm the situation, begged me to calm down, and then Steph started crying and admitted that the real reason they had gotten married and moved in so quickly was because she was financially ruined, that she had lost all her money in bad investments or something, that she literally had nowhere to go, and that moving into my house had been a matter of survival for her and her daughters. She told me she had convinced my dad to marry quickly and move in because she needed a place to live, that everything had been calculated and planned. And for the first time, I saw something like guilt on my dad's face. as if he was just realizing he had been manipulated. The next few days were chaotic. My dad was distant and quiet, clearly processing Steph's confession, and she was desperate trying to fix the situation, being super nice to me suddenly, offering to help with the house, apologizing for everything, although I knew she wasn't sincere. The twins were confused and scared because they realized their mother had lied about many things, and I just wanted everyone to leave once and for all. I called Amy again and told her about the letters and the confessions, and she told me that didn't change anything legally, but it reinforced my position if they tried to cause trouble after the eviction. The day they were supposed to leave finally arrived, and it was an absolute disaster. Steph had packed her things, the twins too. But when they were loading the boxes into the moving truck they had rented, I noticed Steph was trying to take things that didn't belong to her. A porcelain tea set that had been my grandmother's, some jewelry that had been my mom's, antique paintings that were family heirlooms. I confronted her, and she tried to say my dad had given her permission to take those things as compensation for everything that had happened, but I told her nothing in that house belonged to her, that those were my family's heirlooms, and if she tried to take anything, I would call the police immediately. My dad intervened and told Steph to return everything, and she had an absolute tantrum, screaming that we were ungrateful, that she deserved something after everything, but eventually she returned the things and they left. My dad left with them, although he looked miserable doing it. He loaded his things into his car, looked at me once as if expecting me to change my mind and tell him he could stay. But I didn't say anything, and he left. The house was empty and quiet in a way that was comforting but also sad, and I sat in the living room with Moxie, who was much more relaxed now that the other dogs were gone, and I cried for the first time in weeks, not just about what had happened recently, but about everything, about my mom's death, about my dad's betrayal, about the fact that my family had completely disintegrated. I thought that would be the end. That Steph, my dad, and the twins would just disappear from my life, and eventually I could start to heal. But 2 weeks later, I received a legal notice. Steph and my dad were suing me, claiming they were entitled to part of the house's estate because my dad had lived there for years and had contributed financially to the maintenance, and because, according to them, I had caused them emotional distress by kicking them out in a cruel and unjustified manner. Amy almost laughed when I showed her the papers, told me the lawsuit was completely ridiculous and had no legal basis, but that we had to respond formally anyway. The legal process was stressful and exhausting, lasted like 2 months, and during that time my dad didn't try to contact me at all, which hurt more than I want to admit. Jake was with me at all the hearings. Amy handled everything perfectly, presented all the documents proving the house was exclusively mine, testimonies that I had established reasonable rules that Steph and her family had repeatedly violated. Even the security camera recordings showing Steph trying to steal the family heirlooms. The judge reviewed everything, heard the arguments from both sides, and finally dismissed the case completely, validating that the house was solely mine and that I had acted within my rights by asking them to leave. Steph and my dad had to pay my legal fees, which was ironic considering Steph was supposedly bankrupt. I thought that would really be the end, that after losing in court they would finally leave me alone. But then, like 2 months ago, my dad showed up at my house door with all his suitcases and a face I had never seen on him, like completely defeated and ashamed. He told me he needed to talk to me, that Steph had cheated on him with another man, that she had kicked him out of the house where they were living, which was apparently owned by a relative of hers, and that he had nowhere to go. He asked me if he could stay temporarily in the house, just until he found his own apartment. He swore he was done with Steph forever and that he realized how wrong he had been about everything. I wanted to slam the door in his face. Honestly, that was my first reaction, because after everything that had happened, the way he had chosen her over me, the way he had sued me and tried to take my house, I didn't feel I owed him anything. But there was something about the way he was standing there, old and tired and broken, that reminded me of the dad I had known before Steph came into our lives, before everything became a mess. I told him he could stay, but with very strict conditions. He had to go to family therapy with me. He had to respect that the house was mine and follow all the rules I established, and he had to actively work on rebuilding our relationship without expectations that everything would go back to how it was before, because that wasn't going to happen. He accepted all the conditions without arguing, moved into one of the guest bedrooms, and we've been in therapy together for the last few weeks. I'm not going to lie. It's hard. There's a lot of resentment and pain on both sides, things that need to be processed and forgiven or at least understood. I've learned that my dad lived feeling trapped in a marriage that didn't make him happy, that he loved my mom in a certain way but never the way he should have, and that his affair with Steph was his cowardly way of escaping without actually facing his problems. He started to understand the damage he did to me. Not just recently, but over the years by prioritizing his secret relationship over our family, and he's trying to make up for it, although we know some things can't be completely fixed. Last week, we were having dinner together, something we do now on Tuesdays and Thursdays as part of the reconnection process, and he asked me if I could ever forgive him completely. I told him the truth, that I didn't. No, that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and that rebuilding trust takes time, maybe years, maybe never completely. He nodded, looked sad but also like he understood, and told me he was going to keep trying anyway, because I was the most important thing he had, and he had realized that too late. I don't know if we'll ever be able to have a normal father-daughter relationship again someday, but we're trying, and I guess that counts for something. Moxie has been happier now that the house is quiet and it's just us, and Jake continues to be incredibly supportive, although his family still thinks I should just forgive my dad and move on. But this is my process, my house, my decision on how to handle this messed up situation, and I'm going to take it day by day because that's all I can do for now.